Yep. So welcome everyone. Croeso mawr i'r webinar heddiw yma. Cyflwyniad i amaeth goedwigaeth. Welcome everyone to the webinar, Introduction to Agroforestry. This event, if you're joining live or if you're joining and listening to the recording, this is part of our Winter Knowledge Exchange Series, jointly run by NFFN, the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and Coed Cadw Woodland Trust in Wales, supported by the People's Postcode Lottery. So I'm Rhys Evans. I'm the Wales manager for Nature Friendly Farming Network. For those of you who have not come across the network before, we're a farmer-led organisation, and we champion food production that goes side by side with nature and the environment. You can join the NFFN as well. You can join as a farmer member, as a public supporter, or a supporting organisation as well, and you can do so for free. So if you like what you hear this evening, please check out our website. You can learn a bit more about what we do. Check out our materials, reports, case studies, policy updates, etc. And I should mention I farm myself as well, livestock farmer in Rhydymain, near Dolgellau in North Wales. That's enough about me. I'm delighted to be joined by four speakers this evening. I will allow you to introduce yourselves, and we'll go in the order that you're presenting. So, Ed, if you can introduce yourself, and then Jack, Kate, and Hugh. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name's Edd Colbert, and I work as an independent agroforestry advisor, supporting farmers and foresters to design and implement effective agroforestry systems. So I'll be talking a little bit about the different types of agroforestry today and giving some ideas about how you might like to implement that on your own farms.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Jack Coburn. I'm a livestock farmer in Ceredigion, not far from Aberaeron on Cardigan Bay. And we've got cattle and sheep and a 140-acre farm in total, split over 4 blocks of land.
Hello, Kate Bevan, farmer in Monmouthshire, livestock farm, cider maker and woodland creation officer for Stump Up for Trees.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Hugh Williams, recently joined Welsh Government, forestry background, and I'm just up the road from you, Kate, because I live in Herefordshire.
Oh,
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for those introductions. So yeah, without any further ado, Ed, we'll hand over to you to give a bit of an introduction to agroforestry.
Great, thanks, Rhys. Did I just get a thumbs up that you're seeing the right screen?
I'm seeing it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Nice. Okay. Well, yeah, welcome again, everyone. It's great to join this panel and to have also some stories from farmers as well. I'm not a farmer, I'm not a forester. I do work with both, but it's always helpful to hear about people putting the theory into practice. I'm looking forward to hearing from all the panelists tonight. What I'd like to do is to give a real overview of what agroforestry is. And to frame that through the different reasons we might use agroforestry. So for many people, let's just see if this is working forward. When we talk about agroforestry, we talk about it as being a single thing, a tool or a practice, when in fact it's far more, I think, effective to think of it as a toolbox containing many different ways in which we can integrate trees with different farming systems. Some of those ways we might think about how trees can be combined with crops in different ways, which we'll cover later, or with livestock, or think more about the ecological function of trees on farms, often found around the edges through hedges and shelter belts and things like this. So I'll touch on many of these today, and no doubt the farming speakers as well will talk about their own systems on their farms. But rather than focus just on the systems and going through the technicalities there, I'd like us to think really about why we might choose to work with trees at all on our farm. And the best way to do that is to always think about the objectives we're trying to achieve on our farms. Those objectives might be challenges we're trying to overcome or opportunities we're trying to unlock. And today I'm going to talk about these three kind of areas that we might think about on our farms. Think about how trees might support us to improve livestock welfare and therefore productivity, how we might build more resilience both on our farms and beyond our farms as well as some of the economic benefits that might come to mind when people think of agroforestry. Often the things that immediately come to mind is mixing apple trees in with wheat fields or thinking about nut production. But it can be more than just these kind of more typical products we think of coming out of trees. However, as we're going through, we'll see that true to most agroforestry, it's inherently multifunctional. And so one system typically will help us achieve our primary objectives that we have on our farms, while also giving secondary benefits as well. So hopefully you'll see that overlap between many of these different systems. So let's begin with livestock, and starting with the importance of shade. So we know summers are getting hotter and are getting drier. And even with smaller increases in temperature, livestock can begin to suffer, leading to lower productivity. And in fact, you can see here in the case of dairy cattle, heat stress, even at a moderate level of moving from 18 to 20 to 25 degrees, can actually have a worse effect on productivity compared to underfeeding. So one of the major concerns a lot of people have when they think about bringing trees into the land is that it's going to reduce the productivity of land, reduce grass yields. But if we can see that actually the effects of heat stress that can be mitigated against by planting trees can actually have a greater positive effect on overall productivity, even if we did see a slight reduction in grass, which we can come to later as well. At the other end of the thermometer, we also have the issue of cold exposure and lack of shelter on many farms, particularly in cases where people are moving towards more rotational grazing, mob grazing, whatever sort of system you use there, where animals are left in the middle of pasture. Again, we do see a direct relationship between the stress induced by these colder and wetter conditions, leading to animals actually converting more of the calories they consume into maintaining their body condition, maintaining their internal heat, rather than transferring that into live weight gain. In this case, we're looking at a study on sheep. Now, we don't have to immediately jump to trees, and I haven't really shown any pictures of trees just yet. There are people already out there providing other benefits, and we can spend lots of time and money carting parasols around farms. However, a key component of agroforestry compared to these sort of technological interventions, as I've mentioned before, is that they are multifunctional. And so although I'm going to be focusing on shade and shelter initially, we can think of bringing trees into the farm as having additional opportunities, such as providing supplementary feed, additional products, or even advancing ecosystem functions in a farm as well. So although I'm going to talk about those individual benefits, always think in the back of your mind, there are other things happening within the system when we introduce trees. The easiest place to start is with hedgerows. And if you farm in Wales, in the UK, the likelihood is you have at least one hedgerow on your farm. Therefore, you're already doing agroforestry, you're already an agroforester. Sometimes it's not about planting new trees into your farm or putting trees in the middle of a field, but just looking at what you already have on the land and seeking new value from those trees. With hedges, we have the opportunity to look at existing hedgerows and think about how we can improve the value of those to provide shade and shelter for our livestock. We can create new subdivisions in fields, replace fences, start thinking about living fences. And perhaps this is one of the easiest starting points for us to think about agroforestry. Indeed, beyond shelter, there's so many different benefits that can come from hedges. And I know both the speakers, I think, will be touching on their own experience with hedges later today. Moving slightly beyond to wider or more intense, let's say, forms of planting on the land, we can be considering things like shelter belts and windbreaks. So generally much wider boundary plantings of trees with the specific intention of providing some protection from wind. Now, we're not looking to necessarily block wind as we would say with a solid belt of trees. You can see in the top right here, solid blocks of trees like this can actually increase turbulence and cause more damage to crops or increase wind exposure to animals. And so shelter belts are best designed when they have a permeable architecture and can reduce wind speeds of up to 80%, 15 to 20 times the height of the tree, to a distance of 15 to 20 times the height of the greatest tree in the area. Now, although I'm focusing on livestock at the moment, it's interesting to also note that, as you can see in this picture, on the left side, if you can see my cursor, there is less growth in those crops. We can see that quite clearly. However, that's more than made up by this microclimate effect that's created by putting shelter belts into systems, where we can see actually up to of 60% over yielding effect from around 15 to 20 meters in from the shelter belt. Overall, giving you a greater performance within the field. We have different types of shelter belt depending on which winds we're working with. If we're working with sort of general prevailing southwesterly winds, we can be including a broad variety of trees there, whereas if we're looking towards more northeasterly winter winds, we're aiming more for evergreen cover to provide year-round and winter protection for our stock and crops. So windbreaks can also be included within the field. Here we've got an example that kind of looks like an alley cropping system or a silver pasture alleys, which we'll come to in a moment. But as I mentioned before, shelter belts can be planted on the edges of field and provide a good deal of protection into a parcel. However, depending on the overall size of that parcel, it might be that we need further protection from wind as we go into the field. I like to think of this as, if you can imagine skimming a stone on a pond, that initial skim will be fairly great and will take the stone further along the pond. But at a certain point, we might need to bounce that stone further along. So placing in windbreaks here, we can imagine the wind buffering across a piece of land and having more protection from the wind by planting in several more lines of trees. This is an example from the Devon Silver Pasture Network, and just some examples there of costings of what that would look like. And in this case, each block of trees was planted with a shrubby layer on the outsides to protect an internal layer of 3 different species of tree. Going one step further, we can wrap, if you like, windbreaks or a shelter belt in a full perimeter of a field or in a smaller area within a field to create what we call a living barn. This is a great option if we want to move towards more outwintering of our livestock, reduce the use of concrete or new builds on sites as well. So far we've focused on the edges, but again, to provide that shade and shelter within the parcels, particularly where we're looking towards rotational grazing, having more time spent in the middle of fields, we can think about using wood pasture, or sometimes referred to as parkland systems, which are more dispersed or grid formatted plantings of trees. An example here we can see makes use of something called a roundel. So we could be planting trees individually in a field, or in the case of roundels, we plant a single central tree with several rings of other trees around it to provide protection to that central feature tree, with other purposes for those trees around it. So in this case, we have a central tree, 2 layers of thorny nurse trees to protect and provide optimum growing conditions for that middle tree. And on the outside, we have different species of fast-growing browse species. So these are highly palatable, editable species for livestock. Also in this design, again, for rotational grazing purposes, each of these roundels provides an anchor point for movable electric fencing. So we're trying to build in multifunctionality using fencing, not just to protect trees, but also to help move stock around the field as well. Also some example costs there as well. I can of course share this with Reese afterwards to share with people if they're interested to look at the details there. Moving towards more linear systems, so we looked at the windbreaks earlier. We can also think about silvopasture alleys. So these are narrower lines of trees. The spacing between these trees often is optimized for machinery on farms. In the case of pasture systems, that might be looking towards if you're working with taking hay cuts, working with the machinery widths of those machines, or in the case of pure pasture grazing systems, if you're moving mobs of animals around, thinking about what are the minimum size paddocks that you want and using those lines of trees to subdivide an existing paddock into smaller areas. Here, another example from the silvopasture network in Devon. We can see these lines of trees oriented against the prevailing wind coming from the southwest. So the design has been done in mind to provide that shade and shelter. However, the species used were also highly palatable species to allow those animals to browse and derive medicinal and nutritional benefits from the trees. Which brings us to tree fodder, or tree hay, as some people like to call it. Animals do enjoy browsing from trees, and we can kind of see trees as a vertical extension of our pastures. Whether that's browsing directly from the trees or having the opportunity to cut fresh growth in the summer and feed it as hay, or even ensile it for winter feed as well. Now, why would we do that? Many different species of tree are highly comparable in protein content and other nutrient contents to common pasture species such as red clover. They also have a lower fiber content, which in some cases farmers reported this actually is very helpful as a supplementary feed to reduce loose stool in livestock. So not just a nutritional benefit, but also offering a medicinal advantage as well. Not all trees are created equal, and what we can see here from left to right, a number of different tree species ordered in their level of palatability for different species. All of these species are palatable and are enjoyed by livestock. When we're selecting species for livestock in particular, we need to really be sure that we're avoiding any known toxic species, for example, yew. However, where we can provide a high diversity of species within a livestock system, it allows for animals to preferentially self-select the particular species they want, which they can derive certain minerals or other nutritional benefits from. Just going to spend a moment on willow species in particular as an example of this. It's a very common set of species to see in agroforestry systems, in part due to its great multifunctionality, but from a livestock nutrition point of view, each species is a great source, a great accumulator of zinc and cobalt, things that are often found as deficient in pastures. They contain condensed tannins, which not only can lead to reductions in methane output from livestock, but also offer a natural anthelmintic or anti-worming property, and are a source of salicylic acid, which is the active component of aspirin. So there is a theory that animals will preferentially browse willow when they're seeking pain relief. So a number of different things we can get from a variety of willow species here. A great one to include. Further on pest and disease, some evidence to show that walnut trees can repel flies around livestock housing units. But also, as many of you may see in your own systems, where there are individual trees in fields, they're often very popular sites for seeking shade and shelter, as you could see in this picture. The problem is with only a few or individual trees in a field, they're often sites of poaching and compaction, leading to issues such as mastitis. While many people can see that individual tree as a problem, we can be forgiven to start thinking that the tree is causing an issue rather than a lack of further trees being able to spread that impact across the farm. Further stress reduction can be found in the way that trees actually have been seen to alter the behavior of livestock. We see greater social behavior, as well as the ability for animals to rub on trees and to manage their own coats and hygiene, all of which lowering their heart rates, further increasing productivity. Coming on to wider farm and landscape resilience, a number of different systems we can think of. So if there are waterways, planting trees along waters in what areas known as riparian woodlands or buffer zones, can help us reduce runoff of pollutants by up to 80%, can reduce sediment by 20 to 80%, as well as reducing pesticide losses by as much as 100% from farms. Where these are wide enough on the land, they can also offer great summertime or a dry season woodland grazing opportunities as well. Moving up the slopes, we don't always have to plant in straight lines or in perfect grid formats. We can also look at the land and see what natural shapes and forms are present there. Working with the contour allows us to slow the flow of water and above ground runoff across the land. And if we're to take contours at uniform distances, we can in effect still work as an alley system, still mechanize these systems. In this case, this is a design from a farm in Yorkshire looking to implement a traditional 10 by 10 meter orchard, but using this contour design rather than going in straight lines across the farm. We touched on shelter belts protecting from wind, but they can also be used as a way of capturing ammonia and other airborne pollutants from animal housing. Up to 25% from housing emissions and up to 20% from slurry lagoons. These are slightly wider plantings, typically 10 to 20 meters nearby animal housing, and have also been used as free-range facilities for poultry that go in and outdoors as well. So a few options there. When it comes to biodiversity, people often will talk about agroforestry or an objective being they want to increase biodiversity on their farm. And while this is very well-meaning, I don't know if this has come up properly. Yeah, this is a well-meaning desire. We need to really be nuanced about what biodiversity exactly we're aiming to increase on our farm. As we can see here in silver arable system, so this is mixing arable cropping, vegetable cropping, with tree lines, we do see an increase in predators and parasitoids, which is of great benefit to crop farmers. And as you'd expect, we'd see a decrease in insect pests. We also see a major increase of 80% in pollinators. However, we also see an increase in slug pests. No doubt, by planting trees, we also encourage more wild mammals onto the land. And so we need to really make sure we're appreciating agroforestry as a dynamic system that needs to be monitored and managed over time, and not assume that all biodiversity will be the kind of biodiversity that we're looking for on the farm. Coming to the economic benefits, we're going to hear a little bit more later on about fruit production in particular. But it's interesting to also think about not only how might we bring more product off the farm, but how might we reduce the amount of product or inputs we need on the land ourselves. Two interesting areas to explore here is with the use of wood chip production on site, which can be used for wood chip bedding, for example, to offset the cost of buying in animal bedding. It's a brilliant source of mulch as well, either for planting further trees or if you're in a horticulture system. It's being readily used to produce compost. And in certain agroforestry systems across the UK, people have been setting up agroforestry specifically with the purpose of producing biomass to provide on-farm fuel for house heating or other biomass fuel uses as well. Fence posts is perhaps not something people immediately think of when they think of agroforestry, but by using coppice, I believe we'll hear from Jack later about how he's coppicing on his land, we can set up rotations to actually pre-plan ahead, knowing when our fences might need replacing to have the timber ready and available in time, rather than buying in timber from other sites as well. We had a look at the example of silver pasture alleys. This is an example of silver arable this time from Wakelands. It's one of the oldest agroforestry sites in East Anglia. Here they're producing a variety of different arable and horticultural crops in the alleys, with a variety of coppiceable trees planted into the tree rows. In this case, they are using a lot of that for on-farm biomass use, as well as producing a variety of roundwood timber products. I believe one of the most popular products is bean poles that they sell, also as and hazel hurdles for hedging. So quite a range of products coming out of just one system there. Another example here, this is a 22-hectare site just outside of Peterborough, where we designed a variety of walnut trees intercropped with various nurse trees between, so 8-meter wide spacings between the walnut trees, and firewood, or trees being planted for firewood, using those spaces between the walnuts as a short-term revenue, to buy a little bit of time in the system until the walnuts are at maturity. Much of what I've spoken about has been bringing trees into farming systems, but agroforestry can also be about doing things in the other direction, about bringing farming systems into existing trees. So we might think of where we have orchards. Is there opportunity to graze those orchards? If so, we need to be really careful to protect those trees properly. One example I've included here is the use of cactus guards, which are very heavy-duty tree guard for high-value trees. Or in another case, we might look to considering how might we sensitively use our existing woodland as areas for short-term temporary grazing areas or forage areas. Now, this is often seen as quite a romantic idea of pigs foraging around for beech nuts and acorns and things. However, we need to be really careful to consider this not as an opportunity for set stock management of animals, which can cause a lot more harm than good, but rather as part of a wider holistic or rotational plan on a farm to think about how we might use the livestock for the benefit of the woodland for managing the undergrowth as much as providing a benefit to those livestock using them. Finally, it's a personal interest of mine to start thinking about how might we use the ideas of agroforestry to start communicating a value addition to the consumers of our products. Many people will know the narrative of planting a tree to save the world. It's a very kind of green, easy idea to capture, and people can grasp the concept of planting trees as a good idea. However, it's a lot harder for people to necessarily understand or support directly forms of regenerative farming or agroecological farming. And agroforestry is this wonderful way of bringing those two narratives together, helping people see the value that trees can bring to a farm to produce more sustainable food. And here are just 3 examples of products that are available in the UK that, although they might not specifically use agroforestry in their labeling, they're beginning to build on this narrative of how trees and farms can coexist with one another to produce a more sustainable product. So there's a real opportunity here for really adding value to the products we're producing on our farms. So we've covered benefits of trees to livestock, both in terms of their welfare and in terms of their productivity. Thought more broadly about how trees might support us to increase farm and landscape resilience across a variety of different ways. And also considered how we may derive further economic benefits from using trees. Many of the agroforestry systems I've shown you are able to touch into one or more of these different areas. But the key thing is making sure that when we're considering agroforestry on our farm, we lead that design by focusing on what the objectives are your specific farm is looking to achieve. It's not for everybody. If you walk away from a session like this thinking agroforestry is not for me, that's still a result. The key thing is making sure you're making informed decisions and planting the right trees in the right place to help you achieve your farming goals. And things back over to Reese.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ed. That was a really, comprehensive sort of introduction to the subject. I think safe to say over the last kind of year or so, or certainly 2 years in Wales, kind of trees has become a bit of a divisive word, where we seem to have fallen into this mindset of having to decide between planting trees or producing food. So it's really cool to see, that they can coexist, and there are numerous benefits for livestock, but also your kind of soil health, kind of reducing your input costs, like you mentioned. So, thank you very much for that. That was a great introduction to the subject. And I see the questions are coming in, so that's great as well. Jack, we'll hand over to you. It'd be great to hear, how you as a farmer kind of putting this kind of theory into practice on your farm. So over to you, Jack. Yeah. You are on mute, just so you're aware.
Sorry, it's glitching a bit. Okay, I hope you can see my first slide. Good evening, everyone. I spoke to a friend about this webinar, and he's not a farmer or a forester, and he said, "What's agroforestry? What does the agro bit stand for?" And I was saying, well, it's kind of I don't know really. It's agriculture. So we weren't sure why there's an O, and he was saying, does it stand for aggravations? Is it so? If you're a pure forester, you might see it like that, but as a farmer, it adds a lot of interest. Um, so you could say it's putting the agro into forestry, but so anyway, I've just got a little map of our farm here in Ceredigion, and this is a roughly 80-acre block of land, and we've got, as well as the farm and fields and woodlands, which is home to our traditional Hereford cattle and small flock of Llanwenog sheep. We've also got holiday cottages, which are, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's just around there. We've got 8 holiday lets as well. So the woodlands have been designed to benefit visitors to the farm for kind of leisure and recreation, and also for providing firewood, because on site we've got 3 wood burning hot tubs and about 5 log burners in the houses. So we do use a lot of firewood, but that's all home produced. If I just briefly go through what we've got on the map. So A is a field that I could talk about all night, because it's basically like a nature reserve. It's got dry banks, it's got wet bits, it's got areas which in future I'd like to put as ponds, make scrapes. It's just got a bit of everything. And in the 80s, there was a lot of drains put in, a lot of expense gone into draining it. Over time, by the time I started farming it in about 2004, the drains had started to fail, and I just considered that it wasn't cost effective to keep renewing drainage in a field that's never going to be very good, because it's got around here large areas of rushes, and that's grey clay. So A is an area where there's now some natural succession of willow, and this has come in not by excluding livestock, because every summer for the last 20 years I've had cattle and sheep in there. But it's come in the last 5 years by topping the rushes less. So we had some very wet summers, and there's some summers where I just couldn't even get in there with a tractor. And when I was topping rushes, it's a slow job that burns a lot of diesel. I was always thinking, is this really worth it? Is there any economic benefit to cutting the rushes on this wet clay land? So I'm quite glad that letting it grow up more as kind of willow scrub. Saves a lot of time in a hot tractor cab and saves money on diesel. But also I like to observe how the animals are using it. So the cattle will wade in and eat the willow leaves, particularly in hot weather. This area comes into its own when we have a real hot, dry spell. Then moving over to where I've got the letter B, this is woodland that's got a footpath around it for visitors, and it was planted under a Forestry Commission grant in about 2003. And it had to be stock excluded for 15 years. So about 50% of it was ash, and it was the most fantastic woodland up until about 8-9 years ago when the ash dieback disease started to spread. It was a very fast-growing hardwood sort of plantation. So it's very sad to lose the ash there. And then last summer I was thinking, shall I open it up for agroforestry and kind of use the bits where we've lost the ash to kind of encourage grasses and other fodder species amongst the oaks and cherries and other species that are there? Or shall I keep it stock excluded? And I have decided to keep it stock excluded and just replant it. But I think I'm going to put beech, Scots pine, Douglas fir, birch, rowan. So that's and lime as well. There's no lime in there because this was planted with mixes that the Forestry Commission wanted at the time. There's also areas of hazel coppice around the letter C. That was part of the same plantation, but we fenced it off. And after the 15 years was up, we took out the ash for firewood, and then it's now open to livestock on a rotational grazing system. So it's really useful kind of wood pasture, especially, and I do try and save it for when we have either extremely wet spells or very hot spells. And then along the top here, this was part of, this is alongside the road. This is the top of the hill, and the land slopes down to the north. So it's quite a steep slope. Where the letter D is, it's 750 feet above sea level, and we do get strong winds. There's a small wind turbine in this field. This area, because of the wind turbine, we've actually coppiced the shelter belt so that we don't encourage too much wind turbulence as the trees grow up. The coppicing is really good because we've got a firewood processing machine, and the trees are the ideal size to go through the machine. So you can produce a bag of logs in about 45 minutes with the firewood processor, a big bag. Whereas with a chainsaw and splitter, you're looking at sort of hour and a half, 2 hours. So the firewood processor does 3 jobs in one, but you've got to have the right size timber to go through it. So coppice is ideal for that. And then the rest of the shelter belt, where the letter D is a footpath. So the trees are actually giving really good biosecurity with the neighbouring farm. The neighbouring farm, they have a lot of sheep continuously grazed. So the shelter belt just gives us a buffer for our stock. So it's good for biosecurity, but it also means that the visitors who are staying on the farm, they can walk around our whole boundary and they don't have to open and close any gates, which is ideal. And then when they get down to where the letter F is, there's a really lovely section of mature oak woodland down in the Coombe. And there's a steep-sided gorge there. And it's what the Wildlife Trust now call is temperate western rainforest, because it's full of mosses and the like. So the letter F, that was, as part of the Shelterwood scheme, there was 2 acres of wet ground that was filled in as new woodland. So the woodlands, and then I skipped E, but where the letter E is, that was part of the same Shelterwoods planting in 2007. So the trees are really well established now, and we were having a few weeks of temperatures one summer over 30 degrees. So it didn't take me long and the fence posts were failing. So it didn't take me long just to roll up the wire netting, and I allowed the cattle in there for a couple of weeks under the trees, and that just gave them shade in the middle of the day, which was really important. So that is the first kind of introduction to what we're trying to do. I was actually quite inspired 3 years ago by a podcast, which is called the Regenerative Agroforestry Podcast. And it's got case studies on it from all over the world, but also the UK. And I did hear an academic called Dr. Lindsay Wistance, and she did an episode about livestock health and the benefits of trees. And that really opened my eyes to the effects of particularly heat stress. So a cow, just one thing that I can remember from that is that a cow that suffers heat stress, her calf will be born underweight, and that also transmits through to the calf's progeny as well. So a cow that suffers a heat stress event, severe heat stress event, it can actually feed through 3 generations in the end. This is an example of more recent planting that we did in 22. 4,000 trees planted under a Welsh Government planting for pollinators scheme. And what I decided to do is apply for a grant to plant a hedge everywhere we've got a single fence. And this is on another block of land. And so you had to fence out 3 meters. And when you do it, it looks quite scary because you're like, I'm losing a lot of pasture here when you look at the whole alleyway. And even the organic inspector was shocked when he saw it. But now, 3 years later, it's really well established, and the cattle are already leaning over and browsing the willow that's in there. There's a lot of willow and cherry, can't remember what else now, hazel, hawthorn, blackthorn. The species list sort of prescribed by the Welsh Government, I felt, was a bit narrow. I would have liked to put more lime in, but the picture of me with the spade is me doing a bit of guerrilla planting of species that I wanted to be there, like lime and other species, which are great for bees, great for shade, and also good for fodder. This is just, it shows an area where we put green waste compost. So we experimented with different mulches, and I bought wood chip off a local tree surgeon. I was badgering him every time he had I was paying 35 quid for a pickup, sort of back of a pickup load. Actually, it was 25 quid. He's put it up recently, but I do buy it to put under cattle bedding as well. So I'm always trying to get as much wood chip as I can. So we used rotted wood chip, fresh wood chip, which when I looked up online, you shouldn't do that because it won't be good for the trees. But I think I just thought, well, I'm going to use it anyway because I can't get enough rotted wood chip, and I'll see what the difference is. So we had amazing growth from the green waste compost. The trees just took off straight away in the first season. The compost suppressed the grass growth in the first and second season, but there must have just been a huge amount of nutrients in it from all the grass cuttings and God knows what else comes from people's back gardens. But it was from a supplier that composts the municipal green waste. And then, so the rotted wood chip was a happy medium, I would say. And this is the summer after we planted this lot of new hedging. It went in April and May, it was really dry. And then by May, it was really hot. It was over 30 degrees. And I was like, no, because the whole project had cost about £12,000, and the grant was only about 6.5. So it was a bit of a reckless thing to do, really. But in terms of the farm finances, but I think, I'm looking at a 20 to 30 year payback, but if the grants were more generous, obviously I could do a lot more. But so to save the situation, I borrowed a friend's slurry tanker and we backed it down to this pond, which is by the river, and filled it up. And then we spread probably about 200 frogs per every 10 meters. But no, so we'd really doused it with water over a couple of days, and it just provided enough moisture with the wood chip and the mulch, just to see us through that hot period. And then we were okay after that. But so the dieback rate was probably less than 5% from the whole job, which I was really pleased with. Whereas if I hadn't have watered it and mulched it, it could have been probably, could have been like 40, 50% dieback rate, I would have thought. And this is just an example of a cow walking through the mature shelter belt. So instead of mowing them now, we just walk the herd up the footpath, and that flattens the grass. Then you've got a hedge which we've allowed to grow up, mostly sycamore, and this cow's had enough of the rain. She just stuck her head under it. And then you can see the benefit of the browse by what I'm trying to do is allow the hedges that are between fields and that are running from east to west to grow up. And that means that the cows get more shade throughout the day and much more browse. So I think I'll call time on it there. It's okay. I hope you could hear me all right, because my internet's a bit glitchy.
No, you were crystal clear, Jack. Thank you very much.
Oh, good.
I'm cyflwyniad. Yeah, I really liked that slide. The map of the farm and kind of showing, demonstrating what Ed was saying. Really, sort of that you have trees for different reasons, and you really kind of thought about, this is for biosecurity, this is for shade and shelter, this is for an economic output. So that was really really cool to see that happening on your farm. And yeah, when you mentioned sort of planting in that really dry spell, I think we did exactly the same. So we planted a hedgerow on a scorching day in May, and I thought, oh, this is it. These won't survive. And we didn't actually water them, but they're doing amazingly now. And likewise, we planted on one of the wettest days of the year. I think they had to close the schools because it was so wet. And they're thriving as well. So they're quite robust, aren't they? They're quite, kind of trees are quite hardy. So yeah, diolch o galon, Jack. We'll move on to Kate. So hear a bit more about what you're doing and your work with Stump Up for Trees as well. So over to you, Kate. Diolch.
Okay, hello. Can you see that? I'm aware there's some gremlins. I can't see the little squares on there, but apologies if you can see little triangles on there. Right. Bear with. Okay. So hello, good evening. We farm in Monmouthshire. It's a 300-acre carbon neutral livestock farm, traditional livestock farm, as you can see there for Wales. Carbon neutral mainly because we used AgriCalc, which if you've got a lot of good hedgerows and you're putting hedgerows in, you've got clover, you haven't got much in the way of inputs. It's a great calculator to use. The farm's very historic. There's been a farmstead there since the 12th century, and it was there to provide for White Castle, which is at the top. It's not our castle, got to say, it belongs to Cadw, but it's very traditional. So we run, we're probably going to be lambing. We've cut down a bit. We're lambing about 500 ewes. We haven't got cattle at the moment. We're going to go back to cattle. We run courses on the farm, Kate's Country School. And as from this year, we've got a campsite, which is actually within the orchards, and just started a holiday cottage. So I've got a few pictures on here to keep me on track, because I have been known to waffle. So do tell me off if I am waffling. Right. So Hedgerows, I'll try not to repeat what's already been said about browse, but the willow definitely, if you're looking to plant and you're looking to plant for browse, I mean, it's been mentioned, it's a painkiller, it's an anti-inflammatory, it's an anthelmintic, and the interesting thing about the anthelmintic is it's not as effective as artificial anthelmintics, but you don't get any of the resistance, which I think is really important moving forward with a lot of the wormers that we're using at the moment. We've got lots of historic hedgerows on the farm. We've recently put in another 6,000 trees over the last few years, so we've introduced more in the way of shelter belts and hedgerows for the reasons that have been previously talked about, really concerning animal welfare. So we've got some historic trees around the farm as well. One of them in particular, one of my favourites, I'm going to talk about in a moment. But the hedgerows, some of them, they're all sort of cycled around. So we hedge them. We don't hedge all of them at the same time. So we've got some growing, we've got some hedged down, and the fence you can see in the middle of the fields there has recently been planted up as well. If you're planting hedgerows and you want to hedge them, then there are certain species. Obviously, you've got to have your hawthorn, your hazel, your blackthorn as the majority species, and then put the mix in. With the hedgerow, we put in along there. I think we've got about 12 to 14 different species in there because it's a mix between a hedgerow and a shelter belt. I've got two hats on here. So I'm a farmer, but I'm also the Woodland Creation Officer with Stump Up for Trees. So the two are interlinked, and we're a bit lucky with Stump in that we can be a little bit rogue. It's not as prescriptive. So with these particular shelter belt stroke hedgerows, then we experimented with the spacings, with the species, and also with all the hedgerows. We don't use any tree guards. I was really surprised when I started working with trees how much plastic is used with trees. And with the hedgerows particularly, we have got hairs. It's a bit experimental, but they've done really well because on a hedgerow, if they nibble at the leader at the top, the tree's going to go outwards, which isn't a bad thing for the hedgerow. In the shelter belts further on up, we did trial with a few tree guards, but we found over the years, it was interesting. The trees that had the guards and the canes, because it's quite exposed at the top, were not as hardy as the trees that didn't have the canes and the guards. They sort of from saplings, they really had to withstand the wind, and they were way more hardy. Here's some volunteers. With Stump, we're a very, very small charity. There's only half a dozen of us core team, but we've got about 400 volunteers, and that's the volunteers really that really keep us going. And the volunteers vary from regular volunteers we've got on the farm, but also from the nature of our funding. We've got a lot of corporate fundings, and for example, Admiral Insurance is one. And not only do they help us financially, they send teams out as well to volunteer. Ah, this is one of my favorite trees. Small leaf lime. So the small leaf lime, this one is estimated to be between 800 to 1,000 years old. And again, from a browse point of view, it's a great tree. We've got quite a few ancient ones on the farm, and we've planted some new ones. I think what's important if you're thinking about tree species as well, there's a number of things, because we're working with a lot of farmers with, for instance, sweet chestnut coppice. What's important is that it's going to be happy where you put it. So one of the first things we do is we do the desktop surveys, but also you need to know your soils, you need to know your elevation. There are certain trees that do well in base-rich soils, or other trees that do well in acid. So don't just think of a tree species and put it in. Think about where it's going. But the small leaf lime was part of our seed collection. We've got a tree nursery. And when it comes to tree provenance, if you're looking at where you're getting your trees from, or you're growing your trees, then the local is better. So we've collected and grown from the small leaf lime. We've also had volunteers out recently looking at and collecting for the hazel and also the field maple, because it's quite surprising from a genetics point of view, without getting too overly complicated, that not all the trees around are 100% pure. Some of them from sort of 50, 60 years ago have been brought in. They could be a little bit hybrid. So we're very fortunate to have a lot of pure trees, original, on the farm. So we're collecting the seeds and growing them on. I know it's been mentioned before, with grazing, with the woodland, it's controlled grazing. You don't want to overgraze, you don't want to undergraze. We've got the ewes and lambs in here, and at the back we've actually got some larch. So from a timber point of view, we've used the larch off the farm. We built the toilet block for the campsite with the larch. If you come in our kitchen, we've got all sorts of oak and larch from around the farm. So it's important as well from added value on your farm. We had a fallen oak tree, and in the past we might have just chopped it up and used it for the log burner. We planked it, and we've used a lot of it. Jim actually made some tables with it. So if you've got some decent timber on there, you think about just bringing the planker in for a day, then it's worth doing for added on value. Juju. Oh, the river, right. So with riparian planting, I think we've touched a little bit on. So here we did fence off the rivers. We thought it was the right thing to do. It was many years ago, and we had a lot of regen with the alder, which is amazing, but we also had a lot of Himalayan balsam. And what we've learned over the years is, again, it's controlled grazing manages the Himalayan balsam and invasive species. So what we tend to do now is semi-graze. But also, if there's anybody out there and you're thinking of fencing off your rivers, I would recommend a wider buffer strip, and then you can bring your livestock in to graze rather than fence it off completely. For us, and I've spoken to other farmers, it might not be for everyone, but it did cause some issues over the years. Oh, I just like that picture. Again, we've talked about animal welfare and trees. The ewes, because we do a lot of lambing outside, but in the harsh weather leading up to it, the more shelter they've got, the less energy they use trying to keep warm. The colostrum, which is whatever animals you're farming, the colostrum is gold. So if they've got the shelter, the colostrum will be high quality, and that'll have a knock-on effect to your lambs. Productivity-wise, your lambs will grow a lot better as well. Some hazel in the background there. We've got some hazel coppices, great for dormice. I don't know if anybody's interested in dormice, and if you're wondering if you've got any dormice, you just check your nuts, collect your hazelnuts, have a look at them. You can have a look at how they're nibbled as to whether they've been nibbled by a squirrel or a dormouse. And a lot of the plant sites that we do around farms, we tend to do little hazel coppices as well. Now, this is an interesting one. The beauty of trees is it brings people in, and had a phone call with a local vicar, and the faith leaders, all the faith leaders in the UK, instead of going to the COP summit, they wanted to plant a tree on the holiest mountain in the UK, which happens to be a Skyrrid Fawr, this Skyrrid mountain, which is just up the road. So the local vicar got in touch because she knew I was a tree planter, and had to have a Zoom call with the bishop, which was not something you do every day. Anyway, in a nutshell, I did explain that they couldn't plant a tree where they wanted to, partly because it was a priority habitat, but it was also grazed by sheep. So they very kindly came and helped us put one of our shelter belts in, and it was just one of those days. We had the Sikh community, the Muslim community, we had the chief rabbi from London, we had prayer mats everywhere. It was just a very, very special day. And you might notice in the crowd there, in the volunteers, we've got Rowan Williams, who's the ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, who, when he arrived, and you know, your planting seasons from November till March, it can be a little bit muddy. And he arrived in his robes and his crucifix and all his wonderful shiny shoes. And I was a little bit concerned when I was bringing him up on the quad bike, and he said, "Oh, it'll dry clean." But what I had to do is ask, because obviously Rowan then, bless him, such a lovely, lovely man. I couldn't help myself. So Rowan actually planted all our Rowans in the shelter belt, and I think he genuinely blessed it, because they've just grown so well. But yeah, special day. And I think, that's the thing about trees. From a charity point of view, it's quite easy to fundraise for trees. Fencing, on the other hand, not so great. So, we've got some great sort of a lot of good hotels, and the local hotels and the hospitalities who add on room for trees. So people have the option to pay an extra £3 on their room, but sort of room for fencing doesn't really work. So yeah, fencing's more difficult to get money for. Right. So back in the day, when you look at the historic maps, there used to be 30 acres of orchards here on the farm, as there were on many farms. They'd been gone decades. Our cider house is still here. It's 1696. We still make cider the traditional way. So we started putting the orchards back. This particular orchard we planted, it'll be coming up 9 years, 100 trees. All of them came in the boot of my little Clio. I mean, they were just tiny. And this year they'll produce 2,000 litres of cider, proper cider now, party of 5 a day. So, sometimes people think they drink cider, but this is 100% apples, no added yeast or water or sugar. It's very good for you. It's party 5 a day. But it's very difficult to get under 8%. We do graze in the orchards, and obviously pollination and everything else. It's lovely. This is actually a north-facing orchard, and if we'd have gone by the book, we started putting the orchards in the wrong place. But because of the way, I mean, our house is 1420. This farm is very old, and when you look at the historic maps, people used to know where to put things, and whether they're buildings, whether they're trees. So we're putting the orchards back where they used to be, and it's working very well. Quality control, really important. So, if you're making any produce before you sell it, then it is good to try it out first. Right, okay. So a little bit about Stump Up for Trees. This is where it started. So this was about 5 years ago. We were planting at Bryn Arrow. So the founders, Keith and Rob. Keith was part of the Bryn Arrow Common. It was one of the first of its kind, really, in the UK. It took a few years to get through. There are 135,000 trees planted on a very steep bracken slope. And then Keith's neighbour Rob said, "Well, you should carry on. Why stop just behind your farm?" And that's how Stump Up for Trees started. So we cover mainly Banebra Ceiniog, Southeast Wales, but I do go a little bit rogue, as you'll see by my map a little bit later on. But in a nutshell, because I know I waffle, and I hope you can see that with all the little squares and things. So just to give you an overview for last year, so planting season, November through till March. So last year we put 101,052 trees, and we worked in partnership with the parks, with some of the hedgerows as well. So they provided the fencing and we provided the trees. And sometimes volunteers as well. I've mentioned tree guards. If I'm on a site visit and there are obvious, last week I was on one, there's a rabbit warren. There are certain places you do need tree guards, but we prefer to overplant trees than use tree guards if that's at all possible. The other thing we don't do a lot of, and we didn't with our planting site, and certainly with our own hedgerows on our own farm, is prepare the ground. What we find is when the grass grows, it can actually protect the growing trees, especially from droughts. Planting under bracken as well. When the bracken falls, it kills the trees. So with Brynarrow, there were 2.5 meter spacings, but there was a 3 meter buffer that was mowed so that when the bracken fell, it fell into the rows. The other thing we use are tripods. So you plant the trees under tripods so that when the bracken falls, it doesn't fall on the trees. But we try and keep things as natural as possible. We're not very good with straight lines and rows. We like more mosaics. So 60 farmers last year had grants from us. The capital grants just tend to cover the trees and the gardens and the volunteers. For big sites, we also offer grants for 12 years, sort of keeping an eye on the trees as well, because it's quite easy putting a tree in the ground, but it's keeping them alive, particularly in the first 2 or 3 years. That's not as easy. So we've got the tree nursery now, 135,000 saplings growing at the moment. We've had a lot of support and help from Woodland Trust. Thank you so much for that. And we've had 6,500 hours of volunteer times. We've got some amazing volunteers. So this winter, we're very excited because there's certainly 95,000 trees I think we're going to put in, if not more, this winter. But we're going to hit our 500,000th tree, which we're very, very proud about. And some of the schemes, just a few examples there. We do a lot of, there's a lot of free wood pasture out there that is being taken over by bracken. I mean, bracken has its place. One of the things we do is we plant with consensus, if you like. So we work with the Butterfly Trust, with the Archaeological Trusts. I go through all the mapping. So it could be Data Map Wales. We work with the curlews. We jump through so many hoops to make sure it's in the right place. And bracken, I notice SFS, it's down as a habitat. I mean, yes, bracken has its place and it is a habitat, but it is also taking over Wales. So we do try and control it and try and bring some of our Coed Cadws back. Infield pods, I think they're very similar to roundels, so we've been experimenting with those. We do a lot of experimenting. Sweet chestnut, we've been talking to a lot of farmers because they want to produce their own fencing posts, and willow and fodder we've talked about already, trehallies. But we're open to all ideas. We are a little bit rogues at times, so if a farmer gets in touch, the first thing I do is ask them where it is, do the desktop sensitivity check, go out there, and then it's what do they want? What do they want? How can we help you? And we sort of roll from there. So if anybody is in the area, I'll show you a map, though I have got a little bit rogue. It is supposed to be Southeast Wales, but as you can see, I go a little bit off piste. And we'll also be at the Winter Fair. We've got a stand there over the 2 days. So I'll be there both days if anybody wants to come and say hi. I'm going to stop talking now. And thank you.
Kate, thank you so much. Yeah, great presentation. Yeah, I've planted a few kilometers of hedgerows over the last few years, and it 7 stems per meter, is it? Yeah, it's a lot of work, isn't it? Like I missed a trick there. I just need to get volunteers to do it for me. I think that's the way to do it. But like I joke, but like kind of it's nice to see kind of trees bringing the community together. That it's a sociable act. And it's great to see that happening on the farm. And yeah, if you are a listener and you're in Southeast Wales and enthused about tree planting now as a result of this webinar, yeah, get in touch with Kate at Stump Up for Trees. This is a perfect segue talking about kind of funding tree planting. We will the last speaker of the evening is Hugh Williams from the Welsh Government. So Hugh, I'll hand over to you, and I will share my screen. Bear with me.
Thanks, Rhys. Yeah, we were going to do a double act on this, weren't we? I was going to speak, and every now and then I'll say, "Next slide, please." Do you want to just go that's it. Thank you very much.
I'll mute myself, but just tell me when to go to the next slide.
Thanks, Rhys. Will do. Thank you very much, Rhys, for inviting me, and it's really good to hear the passion and excitement there is about woodland creation and management. I've done a lot of woodland creation, and I don't think that in many ways it was one of the highlights of my career. We were doing lots of woodland planting on farms, by farmers and for farmers, and it was really good. And I regard that as one of the best things I've done to date, I should say. So thank you for that. So I'm just going to focus on agroforestry grants. If you go to the next slide, Rhys. And I talk quite a lot about the money, and there's quite a bit of coding in this. And why do I have that? Well, partly because the Welsh Government, that's one of our remits, but also underpinning this is the nitty gritty of, okay, so is there a grant out there to help me do what I want to do? And in essence, I would say yes. As this slide shows, there are many ways to create woodland in Wales. As Ed said, it's kind of a range of tools within the toolbox that people have. I will just focus a bit on the sustainable farming scheme at the end there, because there is a number of actions that are very, very beneficial and sort of designed in part for agroforestry. So that's really important. And there's a couple of specific schemes, the upland agroforestry option, the lowland agroforestry option, and the mixed fruit and nut. Sounds a bit like a chocolate, but it's actually a way of planting trees. And all this is in the context of sort of a dual context, really. Firstly, to enhance and help food production on farms throughout Wales, but also to contribute to efforts to mitigate for climate change and this desire to go towards net zero. So there's a double sort of effort there. We'll be focusing on the sustainable farming scheme and the agroforestry options, but as I say, there are others that are available, and it's a question of looking around and seeing which one you think is right for you and your land. If you go on to the next slide, Reese. Thank you very much. Okay, so here are the changes, some of the nitty-gritty stuff. The size has gone down for individual small blocks. The agroforestry options have been updated. I'm going to say refreshed is a word I tend to use for upland and lowland options. The maintenance period, the payment of that has been extended from 5 to 12 years, and a lot more flexibility on what specification of the plants is. Some of the earlier versions, you had to plant a tree which was 1.5 meters tall. I must admit, the forester in me says, "Oh, I'd go smaller rather than bigger. I'd use 40 to 60s because then you get something with a better root." I did like the sort of agro in agroforestry. How do I regard agroforestry? Well, I mean, it's been around for a long time. I would say it's been in some ways hampered by what is it, and I'm delighted to see the more flexible use of definitions over what agroforestry is. It's certainly gaining much more support, much more recognition for what it can contribute to farming systems and also woodland systems at the same time. So when I hear the word agroforestry, I think options and flexibility. I must admit they're the sort of two words that pop into my mind. If we go on to the next slide. So there, some of the more detail. Here we go. The detail freak and in me comes out about grants. People start talking about options P006 and P007, and these are two of the options which people can use in coordination with the sustainable farming scheme to start the meeting universal actions. And the universal action, it wants 0.1 hectare of new planting on the farms that enter sustainable farming scheme. This is one way of doing it. So it's really quite an attractive option that might be used as part of meeting that requirement. Go on to the next one, the chocolate option, which is the mixed fruit and nut. Thank you. There it is as well. Again, wide range of species. What does it mean by species? Well, I mean, species could include apple, certainly, walnut, wild pear, I thought of, and hazel as well. I must admit, I'm particularly fond of walnut. I think it's a crackingly gorgeous tree, provides really good high quality timber if it's grown in the correct way, has quite a light shade tolerant and casts a light shadow over the ground. I didn't know that it also acted as a fly repellent. I think that's a cracking thing that was new to me. So that's good to see that it's got all these other benefits as well. But again, say it's flexible as to what people can plant. I suppose the caveat is with any source of public money, there comes some rules and regulations, and I include some of those there. If we go on to the next slide, Reese. Thank you very much. So the agroforestry options, they've flexed, hopefully they've improved, they become more user focused, I would say, as well as diverse in the ranges that people can do. In terms of the sustainable farming scheming, hedges are also grant aided, and the tree element can also be counted as an element, just the trees within that, so the standard trees, towards the sustainable farming scheme target. And underpinning this as well is payments for the additional capital items, and they seek to be cost neutral, or at least provide a significant source of the funding towards the option and the items that are chosen. And as with all things, one talks about UKFS, the UK Forestry Standards, so it takes into account things such as buffering sensitive features, not planting on sensitive land, and so on and so forth. And so lastly, or last but one, if we go on to the next slide, Reese, what are we expecting to see? Or we might start to see more of this coming up through the agroforestry options. The big one on the left-hand side in terms of the image, that to me, I closely look to the leaves. That to me is a walnut tree. Other speakers have commented on the use of organic fertilizers around the base, wood chips and manure mixes. Certainly where I've seen that, it leads to a much greater establishment rate in terms of the percentage of trees that live, but as importantly, the growth of the trees. And where I saw them, in one field they hadn't applied anything, and the other field they had, and the difference was chalk and cheese. The trees were twice as tall and as bigger in girth as they were in the tree that hadn't had any applications. We can also see such as riparian edges, top right-hand image there, on sort of lower quality land, providing flood prevention, getting this filtration down into the soil of the water, but also perhaps as a windbreak. It depends upon where they're planted. And on the bottom here, Jack mentioned about the hedges. This is the classic one that I think people will be using through the SFS, not only utilising the grants, but also contributing to the overall economics and benefits of the farm. And I thought it was really interesting, the wide range of evidence that underpins why agroforestry provides benefits to farms, but also to livestock. Some really interesting references, I must admit, that I've taken a note of, so I can use those in the future. So really interesting to see. That's a whistle stop of where it is. If we go on to the very, very last slide, with all these things, where is more information? Where's the nitty gritty? And I would just refer you not to this presentation per se, but to the nitty gritty of what's online. And in terms of the SFS, it is launched in early 2026. The 1st of January springs largely in my mind. So that's something to go for then. Thank you very much, Reese.
Brilliant. Diolch, diolch Hugh. I think the changes in the support scheme and being more flexible and kind of reducing the minimum planting size area. I think that is really to be welcomed. And you mentioned some of the other schemes. So there's Ffermio Bro as well. So the sort of Welsh equivalent to the FIPL scheme, farming in protected landscapes. So I'm fortunate enough to be farming in Eryri National Park. So and within the Ffermio Bro, I think that the tree planting support is even more flexible, where you can plant kind of individual trees with cactus guards, on areas like Kate mentioned, on sort of bracken dominated slopes, or kind of your freed habitat as we have in Wales, that kind of the marginal land between the enclosed fields and the open hill.
Yeah.
But no, it's great that that support is there. So if you are on the webinar now and kind of interested in planting trees, take a look at what Welsh governments can offer you. Brilliant. We started 5 minutes late. Well, we'll have about kind of 15 minutes for questions. Questions have been coming in by the Q&A, and Ed, thank you for answering some of them, typing the answer. I'm going to abuse my chair privilege and ask the first question, if I may. And it's more around sort of silvo pasture. I think kind of as farmers in Wales, like Ed, you kind of mentioned that mo most farmers will be implementing some sort of agroforestry system on their farms, but I think mostly in the main they'll be sort of on the sort of on the edges and periphery, kind of field corners, hedgerows and shelter belts, etc. And the pushback I hear often for establishing silver pasture systems, so kind of infield trees, particularly kind of in rows, is that it's very difficult then to bring the tractor out with a spreader, be it for spreading lime or muck or fertilizer. You know, what would you say to that? I mean, this is a question for everyone really, but kind of if we begin with Ed, like, is there a way of doing both, essentially?
Yeah, and just to clarify, do you mean specifically in the case when you're using like an umbilical device to work around a field, or just
Yeah, just like if you've got your muck spreader or your the spreader used for liming or fertilizer or anything like that on the back of your tractor, really that that it kind of restricts that and you're not
yeah.
able to do it.
Certainly. So if
Mm.
you are using kind of piped appliances, let's say, then it does add additional challenges there. It's going to increase the amount of tractor turns. If, however, you can still get around that with designing in the right way, and maybe you're going to opt for less trees and making sure they're planted at the right widths to allow for the most machinery movement as possible. If, however, you're untethered, you've got a lot more options available. The key thing is making sure you're maintaining a headland, so a margin around the outside, which is a width that is a multiple of the widest machinery you have on your farm. So you'll often see in agroforestry designs headlands and inter-row tree spacings of 24 meters, 36 meters. The reason for these magic numbers is they're divisible by 2 and 3. So they're the most flexible in terms of modular units you can use across a farm. However, there isn't a kind of preset, or there shouldn't be preset off-the-shelf designs. So when I hear that from people, often it's because they've got in their head they have to plant in a certain way, they have to plant in straight lines, or they have to use roundels, whatever it is. This is where the beauty of a design process comes in, is meeting you where you're at and making sure that the trees are not interfering with the management protocols on your farm, but rather are complementing them. So yeah, hopefully that's a bit of a slippery answer.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, yeah, if it doesn't kind of work for your system, then it may not be the type of agroforestry for you. So yeah, that's definitely true. Jack, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just saying because I was just thinking because I use a contractor for big jobs. I check with the contractor the size of their machines. For me, the biggest machine would be the rake that rows up grass. I can't imagine rakes are going to get that much bigger because they can't hardly fit down the roads as they are now. So if I spoke to our contractor and asked them what their biggest rake is, then I'd use that as the minimum size for an alleyway.
Okay, yeah. So tailoring your system to sort of the contractors or people that kind of undertake the work on your farm. Yeah, that's interesting. Kate, do you wanna come in on that?
Yeah, just to agree with, I mean, it's when you go on a site visit, the first thing you do is you walk around with the farmer, the landowner, um, and you, as Ed said, you've got to design it around your management system. So we've had various ones in fields where instead of sort of the roundel sort of shape, you can have a long rectangular one. You've got the cactus guards now, but again, it's just looking at the widths and what works. And if you don't want anything in your fields and you just want it in the corners, or every farm is completely different. I mean, for us, we're slightly different because we're we're made up of farmers working with farmers, and we have good productive ground actually is one of our sensitivities. So we don't like planting on good productive ground unless it does work with the system and it's for the right reasons. So yeah, I mean, you just every farm will have a different plan depending on what equipment they've got and what they want to do in the field.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned sort of some areas that you might want to kind of avoid to plant. So there's a question come in. Like, do you plant anywhere you're asked to?
No.
If, for example, it's a species-rich grassland, or I don't know, an area utilised by ground nesting birds like that. Are there protocols in place to sort of to deter planting in those instances, I guess?
Really good question. So there's two sides to that because we go through Data Map Wales, and the priority habitats are mapped on there. Sometimes they're a little bit out of date.
Mhm.
So my worry at the moment is if it's under 2 hectares and if it's on RPW and you draw a little line around it and nothing flags up, you can plant on it. And actually, if you go on a site visit, sometimes it might not come up as a priority habitat and you get there and it is priority habitat. And if we suspect there's anything, we've got all sorts of hoops to jump through, but certainly ground dependent birds, and we'll work with the Curlew project. But it is really hard to plant in the right place and jump through those hubs. The number of sites that I've been to actually, and somebody wants to plant trees. I think I've got the wrong title. It shouldn't be Woodland Creation Officer because I get there and it might not be labelled as a priority habitat, but it's a really species rich grassland, and it's mainly you get a lot of smallholders who move in and they buy somewhere and they automatically say, I want to plant some trees. And often by the end of the visit, I've persuaded them for whatever reason not to plant trees, and the team are happy with that. So
Mm.
I don't know if you noticed on our stats that yes, we offer a lot of grants, but there's also a lot of farms that we go to and we offer advice, and often that advice is no, that's not the right place for trees. So I often go on visits and end up advising on something completely different. In fact, on some of them, the advice is to create a wildflower meadow, and we've created a lot of those as well, or wetlands. So it's got to be in the right place if you're going to put trees in.
That's really good to hear. Because the
Mm.
kind of danger is, I guess, kind of if you're an organization, you kind of might assume stump up trees. Trees are your priorities, and you kind of go gung ho and kind of advise, go plant trees anyway. But yeah, you're right. Planting the right tree in the right place for the right
Mm.
reason. I know we say it all the time, but it's
Yeah.
really, really important, isn't it? Hey, do you want to come in on that? Just in terms of, so some of the, well, from my experience anyway, sort of on RPW online, when I've tried to um, draw a hedgerow map, a boundary on the map. Sometimes I've not been able to do it because
Mm.
it's a small area of priority habitat. In my mind, it might just be a small rushy bit, which prevents me kind of from actually establishing that hedgerow. And I think it's important to have that, but kind of to safeguard your species-rich grasslands or your ground nesting birds, like we mentioned. But
Yeah, yeah.
in some instances, it can be a bit of a deterrent as well. I don't know whether you agree.
Yeah, it can be. A couple of points. I would just say right tree, right place, right reason. Quite agree with that. And as Kate says, sometimes there's land that actually its uses and its richness do not merit tree planting. It's better to use it for other things. So it's all about sensitivity, because really when people are planting trees, they want to do it once in the right place, so they don't have to then unpick their actions years later. And that not only requires the sensitivity, but the previous question about how wide and where. Think about it really carefully, and sometimes not planting and the reasons behind it can be as informative and for the useful for the farmer as planting. So why didn't I? Right, I can't do planting. What else can I do? So it's very much a land use question as well. But as I say, I mean, as Kate said, sometimes you go to a place and on the maps it looks fine. When you get there, it's not. It's sensitive. And conversely, sometimes the maps, the data layers, frankly, can be a little bit wrong. And so there is nothing better and nothing more important than going out to site and walking the land.
Absolutely. Cool. One last question. There are a few questions come in. Ed, fair play to you. You're typing away profusely, answering a lot of the individual questions. Some are statements and comments. I won't go through all of them, but there's just a question on the clarification, Kate, on that the relationship between the colostrum quality and shelter. If you can speak to that a bit more, kind of why is that, and
Oh, right.
is
Okay.
there more data elsewhere to find out a bit more? Because I was not aware of that at all. It's a really interesting one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, I don't know where there will be data from a health and welfare and a veterinary point of view. I couldn't point you in the right direction. But basically, yeah, I mean the better the better quality the you've got. So if they haven't got the shelter and they're using up their energy either keeping warm or whatever it is, it's a bit like foraging for food, isn't it? Um, it's I mean that's the thing with as a sheep farmer, it's looking after the ewe from day one. I mean everyone thinks about lambing time, but it's just the quality of that ewe from those early conception sort of time when you put the tup in, it's got to be on tip-top condition. Then throughout the winter months, if they're not using up that energy keeping warm and they've got their shelter, then the colostrum just improves. I mean, colostrum, I could talk all day about colostrum. It's just if if your colostrum isn't up to scratch, then your lamb or your calf or whatever is not going to fare well later on. It just has that ricochet effect. I've got my veterinary head on now, but you just look after that, you get your strength of colostrum, but the shelter really does help. As for the data, it's out there somewhere. I'm really sorry, I don't know where it is, but I can have a look.
Well, Jack mentioned Lindsay Wistons earlier. I think this is a good opportunity to plug some of our upcoming events. So on December the 3rd, Wednesday, we've got an SFS Q&A with Dave Ashford from the Welsh Government. So an opportunity to just hear a bit of an update on the SFS and hopefully we'll have a bit more information on the tree elements. And yeah, an opportunity to ask questions of David Ashford. It's not advertised yet, but it will be. And then the following week, on the Wednesday the 10th, we've got the Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Hedgerows webinar with the fantastic Megan Gimber. And then Lindsay Wistons is doing a webinar on the benefits of trees for, specifically for livestock health and well-being on January the 14th. As I say, they're not advertised yet, but if you join the NFFN for free or follow us on Eventbrite as well, you'll be the first to know about those events. So yeah, do check our website out. We've gone 5 minutes over. I just want to say thank you so much to Ed, to Jack, Kate, and Hugh for what I think has been I've really enjoyed myself this evening. I thought that hour and a half has just flown by. I think the talks are really informative, and that's reflected in the comments section as well. So, diolch o galon I chi gyd. Thank you very much. We will endeavour to answer most of the questions offline. If you do have another question that I haven't thought of, do let us know. But yeah, we'll call it a day for now. Diolch yn fawr, and yeah, we'll see you at the next one. Cheers.
Thank you.